flight attendant humiliated LeBron James in first class. What happened next shocked everyone. LeBron James adjusted the brim of his navy blue baseball cap, staring at his reflection in the hotel mirror. Gone were the designer suits, the blinding camera flashes, and the unmistakable aura of an NBA legend. Instead, a simple gray hoodie, loose jeans, and a pair of worn-out sneakers. Oversized sunglasses covered his eyes, and a black mask concealed the lower half of his face. For years, every move he made had been dissected, analyzed, and criticized. Fame, fortune, it all came with a price. But today, he wanted something different. A moment of normalcy. A day without the weight of his own name following him. So, he made an unusual choice. No private jets, no VIP lounges, just a commercial flight. First class, sure, but still a world away from his usual luxury. As he navigated the crowded halls of LAX, nostalgia hit him. The hum of suitcase wheels, the distant crackle of announcements, the smell of fast food mixed with jet fuel. It reminded him of his younger days, back when he was just a kid chasing a dream, moving through airports like everyone else. People brushed past him without a second glance. Some were lost in their phones, others wrangled restless kids or clutched overpriced lattes. Even the security officer barely paid him any attention, his towering frame just another silhouette in the sea of travelers. At the gate, he handed over his boarding pass. The attendant scanned it, never even looking up. "Enjoy your flight," she muttered, already focused on the next passenger. LeBron shrugged and made his way down the jet bridge, the familiar hum of the aircraft growing louder with each step. Stepping onto the plane, he was greeted by a flight attendant, a woman named Susan, according to her name tag. Her smile was polite but distant. "Seats are to your left," she said flatly, barely glancing at him. But the moment the passenger behind him stepped forward, a well-dressed man in a tailored suit, her entire demeanor changed. "Welcome aboard, sir. Can I offer you a glass of champagne?" she beamed. LeBron found his window seat, settled in, and quietly observed. Around him, passengers were being doted on. A couple across the aisle received glasses of sparkling wine. An older woman was handed a plush blanket without even asking. A businessman a few seats away was offered a selection of newspapers. Yet, no one approached LeBron. Minutes passed. The seat next to him remained empty until a heavy-set man in a pinstriped suit appeared. He glanced at his boarding pass, then at LeBron, and let out an irritated sigh. "Excuse me," he muttered, squeezing past without waiting for LeBron to move. He adjusted his gold cufflinks, smoothed out his tie, and settled in with a huff. Moments later, Susan reappeared, this time all smiles. But not for LeBron. "Mr. Whitman. So lovely to see you again," she gushed. "Will you be having your usual pre-flight drink?" "Yes, thank you." "Scotch on the rocks," Whitman replied, barely acknowledging LeBron. Then, Susan finally turned toward him. "And for you, sir?" she asked, though her eyes never actually met his. LeBron cleared his throat. "Could I get a bottle of water, please?" Her smile tightened. "We'll be serving beverages after takeoff," she said curtly and walked away. Whitman chuckled under his breath. "They let just about anyone in first class these days," he muttered, not quietly enough. LeBron clenched his jaw. He had faced judgment before, long before fame shielded him from it. Taking a deep breath, he reminded himself why he was doing this. This wasn't about luxury or service. This was about seeing the world as it really was. As the cabin lights dimmed and the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, he knew one thing for sure: this flight was about to get a lot more interesting. A flight attendant humiliated LeBron James in first class. What happened next shocked everyone. As the flight attendant performed the safety demonstration with a well-practiced smile, LeBron James fastened his seatbelt and took another glance around the cabin. The air was thick with exclusivity, but instead of feeling luxurious, it felt suffocating. The quiet murmurs, the sideways glances, he could feel them, even with his sunglasses on. The engines roared to life, and soon, the plane ascended into the night sky. Below, the city lights blurred into a mosaic of gold before disappearing into the clouds. LeBron closed his eyes, hoping to find some solace in the anonymity he had sought, but the weight of judgment pressed down on him, as palpable as the pressure change in the cabin. Once the seatbelt sign turned off, the flight attendants moved swiftly through the aisles, offering drinks and snacks to the passengers. A young flight attendant, Jeremy, according to his name tag, stopped at their row. "Would you care for a beverage?" he asked. "Another scotch," Mr. Whitman said without so much as a glance up from his phone. Jeremy turned to LeBron. "And for you, sir?" LeBron barely opened his mouth before Susan, the same attendant who had been dismissive earlier, appeared beside them. "I've got this, Jeremy," she cut in sharply. Jeremy hesitated, clearly taken aback, but stepped back. "Actually, I was just," LeBron started. "Sir, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be serving beverages shortly," Susan interrupted, her tone leaving no room for discussion. LeBron leaned back in his seat, biting his tongue. This wasn't just inattentiveness. It felt intentional. He watched as Susan moved down the aisle, her demeanor warm and accommodating to every other passenger. Unbelievable. Beside him, Whitman smirked. "You know, if you're not comfortable up here, there's no shame in moving to another cabin," he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. LeBron turned his head slowly, meeting his seatmate's gaze for the first time. "I'm fine where I am, thanks." Whitman shrugged. "Suit yourself." Staring out the window into the vast, dark expanse, LeBron reflected on the irony of the situation. In trying to escape the burden of fame, he had stumbled upon another harsh reality, the kind of visibility that didn't come with admiration, but quiet contempt. Time dragged on. The in-flight movie didn't interest him, and sleep was impossible. Instead, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a notebook and pen. Writing had always been his way of processing the world, cutting through the noise, making sense of things that didn't sit right. He jotted down everything: Susan's dismissive attitude, Whitman's smug condescension, the unspoken but obvious shift in the way he was treated. Each word flowed with ease, the page absorbing his frustration, his disappointment, his clarity. Then, a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Excuse me." LeBron looked up. It was Jeremy. "I thought you might like a bottle of water," he said quietly, slipping it to him discreetly. For the first time that night, LeBron smiled beneath his mask. "Thank you," he said, sincerity evident in his voice. Jeremy nodded. "Let me know if you need anything else." Then he walked away, unbothered by whatever silent rules the cabin seemed to abide by. LeBron exhaled, feeling something shift. Not everyone subscribed to the quiet prejudices that had followed him from the moment he stepped onto the plane. The rest of the flight passed without incident, but the interactions lingered in his mind. This wasn't just about poor service or an uncomfortable flight. This was a reflection of something bigger. A reminder that people are often judged by surface-level assumptions rather than who they actually are. As the plane descended, the cabin buzzed with passengers preparing for landing. Seatbacks clicked into place, phones lit up with notifications, conversations picked up. Whitman stretched and adjusted his tie. "Well, that was enlightening," he said sarcastically. LeBron looked at him for a long moment before responding. Indeed, it was. As passengers began to disembark, LeBron waited patiently. Jeremy caught his eye and gave him a subtle nod. LeBron returned the gesture, grateful for the quiet moment of respect. Stepping into the terminal, he pulled down his mask and removed his sunglasses, breathing in the familiar yet distant air of anonymity. People bustled around him, caught up in their own worlds. But LeBron was no longer just observing, he was participating, awakened to a reality that countless others faced daily. And as he walked toward baggage claim, he knew one thing for certain. This flight wasn't just a lesson. It was a call to action. A flight attendant humiliated LeBron James in first class. What happened next shocked everyone. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, a distant white noise against the murmurs of quiet conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the rustling of newspapers. LeBron James leaned back in his seat, staring out the window, trying to shake the feeling that had settled over him since boarding. The cabin should have felt comfortable, exclusive even, but instead, there was a weight in the air, one he knew all too well. His seatmate, Mr. Whitman, had made it clear from the start that he wasn't thrilled about sharing space. The man sat with his legs spread wide, taking up more room than necessary, his elbow repeatedly brushing against LeBron's as he reached for his drink or adjusted his briefcase. "Sorry about that," Whitman muttered, nudging him once again, though the lack of sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. He smirked, eyes glinting with something condescending. "Guess these seats are a bit tight for someone your size." He chuckled, as if they were sharing some private joke. LeBron's grip tightened around the armrest. He had learned long ago the power of restraint, how to keep his emotions in check even when the weight of judgment pressed down on him. But that didn't make moments like this any easier. The absurdity of it all gnawed at him. Here he was, one of the most recognizable athletes in the world, dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans, trying to blend in. And yet, despite all he had achieved, despite everything he had built, he was still the subject of silent scrutiny. It wasn't about being unknown. It was about being unseen. A few minutes passed in tense silence. "Everything all right over there?" Whitman's voice cut through his thoughts. LeBron turned, meeting the man's gaze. The fake politeness in his tone was almost laughable. Whitman's forced smile barely reached his eyes, and he seemed to be looking just above LeBron's head, as if making eye contact would somehow make this interaction more real. LeBron gave a curt nod. "Yeah, just fine." Whitman chuckled, as if amused by the entire situation, and took another sip of his scotch. Then, Susan, the flight attendant who had ignored him earlier, reappeared. Her expression shifted the moment she approached. "Mr. Whitman," she beamed, "I see you're already comfortable. Can I get you something else to drink?" Whitman lifted his glass. "Another scotch on the rocks." "Of course, sir," Susan said with a slight bow of her head, as if he were royalty. She turned to leave, but hesitated for a fraction of a second, glancing in LeBron's direction. She didn't speak. Didn't offer him so much as a polite nod. Nothing. The slight was subtle, so subtle that someone else might not have even noticed it. But LeBron did. And it cut deeper than words. He watched as Susan moved down the aisle, stopping at every row to serve the other first-class passengers. She greeted them by name, smiled warmly, made small talk. It was an effortless display of hospitality, one that had deliberately excluded him. The knot in LeBron's stomach tightened. He had been on enough flights to know how first-class service was supposed to work. It was supposed to be seamless, attentive, welcoming. But instead, he sat in silence, ignored, as if he didn't belong. For a moment, frustration bubbled to the surface. He could have spoken up, could have demanded the respect he deserved. But then what? He had learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting, not because they didn't matter, but because they revealed more about the people waging them than they did about their targets. And as the flight continued, he realized something. This wasn't just about him. It was about a reality that too many people faced daily, one they didn't have the luxury of escaping. This flight was more than just a trip. It was a reminder. A reminder that, no matter how much success he had, some people would never see past the surface. A flight attendant humiliated LeBron James in first class. What happened next shocked everyone. Minutes dragged on, each one stretching longer than the last. LeBron tried to distract himself, flipping through the notes he had scribbled earlier, but his mind kept circling back to the same thing: Susan's cold dismissal, Whitman's smug condescension, the unspoken but undeniable message that he didn't belong. It wasn't new. It never was. People saw him, but they didn't see him. They saw the name, the celebrity, the public persona. But the man behind it? The individual? That part of him always seemed invisible. Across the aisle, Whitman shifted in his seat, his knee pressing against LeBron's. It was a small thing, almost insignificant, but the longer it went on, the more it grated at him. LeBron exhaled slowly, keeping his voice even. "Hey, do you mind?" Whitman blinked, caught off guard by the directness of the question. He glanced down at his knee, as if just realizing it was pressing into LeBron's space. "Oh, sorry," he muttered, shifting away without a second thought. No real acknowledgement. No sincerity. Just an automatic response, like brushing off an inconvenience. LeBron clenched his jaw but let it go. There was no point. He had long since learned that people like Whitman didn't change. They weren't looking to. And he didn't have the energy to teach anyone a lesson today. All he wanted was to get through this flight, to land, to leave this entire experience behind. And yet, there was something about this moment that wouldn't let him fully move past it. A nagging thought that settled deep in his mind. This wasn't just about him. This was about anyone who had ever been judged before they even had a chance to speak. Anyone who had ever been dismissed, overlooked, or made to feel like they didn't belong, not because of anything they had done, but simply because of who they were. The thought lingered, pressing against the walls of his mind like an undeniable truth. The flight continued in silence. The uncomfortable, thick kind. Whitman seemed content nursing his drink, and LeBron kept his gaze locked on the window, staring out at the endless stretch of clouds. The rhythmic hum of the engines was steady, almost comforting, but his mind was anything but at ease. He had hoped that, just for this one flight, he could experience life as an ordinary person. No cameras. No expectations. No prejudices. But that had been a fantasy. Because no matter how much he tried to escape it, no matter how simple his disguise, the world would always see him the way they wanted to, not for who he was, but for who they assumed him to be. And that truth? It was exhausting. The flight dragged on. Hours passed, each one filled with an unspoken tension that neither he nor Whitman acknowledged. But it was there, sitting between them like a third passenger. LeBron's thoughts spiraled deeper. How many others had felt this same discomfort? How many had sat in rooms, on buses, on flights, silent, tense, knowing they were being judged for reasons that had nothing to do with their character? How many had been treated as less than, not because of who they were, but because of what someone else had already decided they must be? He exhaled, running a hand over his face. Then, almost instinctively, he reached for his phone. He opened the voice recording app, his thumb hovering over the record button. This wasn't something he usually did. He had never liked broadcasting every injustice, every slight, every moment of quiet prejudice. He had spent years learning which battles were worth fighting, which moments deserved his voice. But today felt different. Because this wasn't just his fight. This wasn't about him feeling ignored, dismissed, unseen. It was about the millions of people who experienced this daily, who didn't have the luxury of fame to shield them, who weren't given the chance to prove themselves before the world made up its mind. It was about perspective. It was about how, no matter how much success you achieve, some people will always see you through a lens of bias. And in that moment, sitting in the first-class seat he had paid for, on a flight that should have been uneventful, LeBron realized something. The world had a way of making you feel small, of making you question yourself. But the real power? That came from refusing to let it define you. A flight attendant humiliated LeBron James in first class. What happened next shocked everyone. Did he belong? Did he matter? LeBron James had spent his entire life proving that he did. But there were millions who didn't have the platform, the visibility, or the resources to do the same. They faced the same silent judgments, the same quiet dismissals, but without a voice loud enough to challenge them. He had to do something. Anything. LeBron tapped the record button on his phone, setting it casually in his lap, the camera angled discreetly toward the aisle. He wasn't sure what he was looking to capture. Maybe it was proof, maybe it was just a moment of clarity. Either way, he wanted to document what was happening. His seatmate, Whitman, was now deep in conversation with Susan and a few other passengers. LeBron didn't need to hear what they were saying to know how they felt. He could see it in their eyes, in the way they avoided looking at him, in the way their laughter felt too easy, like an inside joke he wasn't meant to be part of. The contrast was glaring. LeBron sat there in silence, acutely aware of every detail around him. The way the flight attendants glided down the aisle, their polite smiles stretched just a little too thin. The way they seemed to be everywhere but near him. The way Susan's gaze flicked toward him, just for a split second, before darting away as if looking at him too long would be a mistake. Instead, she was absorbed in Whitman's story, some exaggerated tale about a business meeting in New York. The passengers around him leaned in, nodding, laughing at all the right moments, fully engaged. And yet, not once did anyone acknowledge LeBron's existence. It wasn't just being ignored. It was the effortlessness of it. The warmth, the camaraderie, it was all extended so freely to others while he remained on the outside looking in. It wasn't new. He had felt this before. In boardrooms, in locker rooms, in restaurants. But somehow, this felt worse. Because this wasn't hostility. This was erasure. The quiet kind of prejudice that didn't make headlines. The kind that existed in subtle glances, in small exclusions, in the way someone could make you feel invisible without ever saying a word. LeBron let the recording run for a few more moments. Just as he was about to stop, something caught his attention. A few rows ahead, an older woman glanced back at him. It wasn't just a look, it was something more than that. A kind of curiosity that made his skin crawl. Not the kind that made someone feel seen, but the kind that made you feel studied. Like a specimen. Like something that didn't belong. Their eyes met, and for a split second, she froze. Then, as if realizing she had been caught, she turned away, quickly, deliberately, like she had been looking at something she wasn't supposed to see. A wave of discomfort washed over him. This was what he had been trying to escape. Not the fame, not the cameras, this. The feeling of being observed, dissected, but never truly understood. He wasn't a person in that moment. He was a curiosity. A riddle wrapped in a hoodie, a mask, and a pair of sunglasses. And the worst part? He had seen it all before. A flight attendant humiliated LeBron James. What happened next shocked everyone. As the plane ascended into the sky, LeBron James felt an all-too-familiar weight settle over him. It wasn't turbulence or the pressure of the altitude, it was something deeper, heavier. The glances, the unspoken judgments, the subtle exclusions. The silent understanding that, despite all his success, all his accolades, he was still seen a certain way. Or rather, not seen at all. From the moment he had stepped onto the plane, disguised in a simple hoodie, jeans, and a baseball cap, the shift in treatment was noticeable. The flight attendant, Susan, had barely acknowledged his presence. His seatmate, a well-dressed businessman named Whitman, had greeted him with nothing more than a dismissive comment about tight seats for someone his size. The first-class passengers around him had shared polite conversations, laughter, and warm exchanges with the flight crew, but not with him. LeBron had seen it all before. The microaggressions, the quiet gatekeeping, the unspoken exclusions. But that didn't make it any easier. He could have ignored it. Let it pass. Let it be just another moment in a long history of silent prejudices. But this time, he didn't. This time, he recorded it. With his phone resting discreetly on his lap, LeBron captured everything, the way flight attendants overlooked him, the way his seatmate claimed space without consideration, the stark contrast between how he and others in first class were treated. He knew this footage wasn't just about his experience. It was about so many others who went through the same thing, people who didn't have a platform, people whose voices were drowned out before they could even speak. The flight continued in uneasy silence. The indifference pressed in on him like a physical force, and the realization settled deeper, this was what so many endured daily. Not the outright hostility that made headlines, but the insidious kind, the kind that chipped away at a person's dignity in a way so subtle that it was easy to dismiss. But then, as the plane neared its destination, LeBron made a decision. He was done being invisible. With slow, deliberate movements, he reached up and removed his mask. He lowered his sunglasses. And for the first time in hours, the world around him saw LeBron James. The reaction was immediate. The whispers started first, soft, hushed voices rippling through the cabin like a wave. Postures stiffened. Eyes widened in realization. Susan froze mid-step, her face paling as recognition dawned on her. Whitman, who had been comfortably smug the entire flight, suddenly looked unsure of himself, his confidence flickering like a dying ember. LeBron didn't have to say much. His presence, his unmasking, spoke volumes. But when he did speak, his voice was calm, steady, unwavering. "It's not about who I am," he said, his gaze locking onto Susan's. "It's about how people like me are treated every day. It's about respect." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. There was no excuse, no way to justify what had happened. No way to brush it off as an oversight. Susan stammered, trying to find the right words, but there were none. The entire cabin was watching now, their eyes flicking between LeBron and the flight crew, between their past actions and the reality now staring them in the face. By the time the plane touched down, the video was online. And it exploded. Millions watched. The footage spread across social media like wildfire, sparking debates and conversations far beyond the confines of that first-class cabin. Celebrities, activists, and everyday people weighed in, sharing their own experiences, their own stories of bias, mistreatment, and being unseen. The airline had no choice but to respond. A public apology was issued, followed by promises of training, policy changes, and a commitment to ensuring that every passenger, regardless of race, background, or economic status, was treated with the dignity they deserved. Even Susan released a statement, admitting her bias and vowing to do better. But for LeBron, this was never just about one flight. It was about a larger fight, one that had been happening long before he stepped onto that plane and would continue long after. A fight for respect. For equality. For people to be seen, not as stereotypes, not as assumptions, but as human beings. He knew real change wouldn't happen overnight. It wouldn't be won in a single video, a single conversation, or a single policy update. But it was a start. And sometimes, a spark is all it takes to ignite a movement.